Michael Sawyer.
Hey, how are you doing, Jim?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good.
I've read a lot of Formula One books. I'm the guy that gets up at 3 a.m. and watches the races in Baku and overseas and everything.
Right.
I don't know what I expected when I got this, but what you wrote made me think about Lewis in a completely different light, and I appreciate you for doing that.
No, I'm grateful for that reading of it. Thank you for that. I really appreciate that.
It's a pedestrian question, but what did you learn about Lewis maybe that you didn't know when you got into this? Because I feel like we know so much about him, but reading your book, we really don't. We really don't.
Yeah, I think the thing that I learned most about Lewis is just his ability to have all of his attention on all of these different things almost at the same time, which almost seems impossible in some way, right? Like, athletes in particular have to have a really careful focus on what they're doing in Formula One more than anything else because it's profoundly dangerous, right? But he seems to be, that's why I kind of start the book with him showing up to Met Gala right after this kind of crash in Italy, right? It's like he just seamlessly goes from one thing to the next as if it didn't even happen. So he compartmentalizes things in ways that I think are really fascinating for an athlete who is at the top of his game at the same time, right? Because you'll see athletes who take on other causes or other kind of commercial endeavors after their careers, but he's doing it at the same time, which I thought was really interesting to kind of pay attention to.
And I really appreciated how you talk about his relationship with his dad, because you took the easy answer away from us pretty quick in the book. It's always his dad did this for him and stuff. And then when you get into it in this, Michael, it's not just that he 2 mortgages on the house and drove him everywhere. There's a deeper connection that I never really thought about until you got into this book. And that's something that I don't think we're really aware of. We've seen the tears and everything else in the moments, but did that jump out of you as well?
Absolutely. So the fatherhood angle, the parenting angle, because I think, Anthony Hamilton becomes in many ways the kind of pointy end of the stick, right? But it's both his mother and stepmother who are involved in kind of keeping Lewis on track, right? Whether that's financially, whether it's just finding the space and time to accommodate that. But his dad becomes, manager, father, mechanic, all these kinds of things at the same time from a position of really knowing nothing about the sport, right? And only supporting his son's interest in ways that I found to be fascinating. And much of that was about Anthony taking what he had as a kind of work ethic that he had understood from his upbringing and applying that to something brand new, which is fascinating. And at the same time, it makes the parent-child relationship very difficult, right? Because he's got to have harsh discussions with his son that sometimes would, or, a child broadly defined, right? That would come from a coach or a teacher or someone else, where then you go home and your parents are like, okay, don't worry about it. He's got to do all those things at the same time, which is very, very difficult, right? And then what I hadn't thought about carefully until really digging into this book is that, and then pushing your child to do something that's really dangerous at the same time. I think this was most obviously happens when Lewis finds out that Ayrton Senna has died and they're racing that weekend, right? And his dad has to tell him that his hero has died doing the very thing that he's interested in doing, and still needs his son to be focused enough to keep himself safe while at the same time understanding that this is something that's not a safe endeavor in the first place. So I thought that was something I really learned that was interesting as well.
And you did there was part of the book, Michael, where you talked about if he wanted to be an accountant, or if Lewis would want to, his dad seemed like the kind of guy's like, all right, I'm going to give you every tool so you can be the best at whatever this is, but you're going to commit to it. I remember when our kids were young, if they signed up for baseball or soccer or whatever, we're like, you can do this, but you can't quit. You have to stick with it for the year. You have to commit to this. And the level of commitment that Lewis showed from such a young age, it's powerful. It's a learning lesson. And all these drivers are so supremely motivated and confident, but this is a different gear with Lewis. There's something that's just unique. He's one of one. And I know that's kind of common to say, but it's true. He's one of one.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think Lewis in many ways ends up situating himself in like some of these athletes who are just kind of, so far above and beyond. Because if you think about Schumacher, right? Schumacher is focused on Formula One, right? I don't know much about, and I followed his career carefully, right? And when he was going on, but I don't know much about what he did or cared about outside of that, right? And that is fine for within the confines of Formula One. I think to this point, right, Lewis was able at a very early age to demonstrate to his parents that he was going to do that and also these other things, but they were focused on providing him that opportunity. And, he was a supremely gifted child at this, right? And it's hard to imagine just what these conversations must have been like for the parents sitting there and taking this risk, right? Just financial risk, the risk away from time, right? The kind of risk of their son's body to be like, he's really, really good at this. And we think that there can be something here, because it's hard to discern when it goes from being a hobby to actually, it has to become a profession. right? And I think that Anthony Hamilton bought into the professional question very early on.
That's that tipping point. I always refer to it as a big first step. There's that everybody in life, anyone I've ever talked to is successful in any endeavor. There's that big first step where all of a sudden you're right, it becomes more than just a hobby or something part-time, that you have to commit to it. Friends of ours in Texas used to famously say, you got to pick an onion. Eventually in the grocery store, you got to pick an onion.
Absolutely.
The other thing in the book that struck me out, again, Michael Sawyer with the book, I did read this whole thing front to back. You can ask my wife. I tore through this book. You talked about Nico in a way that I appreciate, because I kind of felt like, as a fan, I've been a fan for a long time, that I felt like Nico would come off to some people as the bad guy. You know what I mean? Like he was, and especially, let's be honest, he was a bit of an a-hole when he first got on F1 TV. The way he talked about Lewis after he retired came from a very, like, it sounded like an entitled guy who was venting about Lewis because he could only beat him once.
Absolutely.
But I heard, right? I mean, and then I heard Lewis this week talking about how he's pushed himself harder than he ever has, and he knew that he had to commit harder to this. And I went, oh dear God, he's talking like Nico did that one year. Right. Lewis knows that he's got to work extra hard to get over the hump this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I think that's the Nico Rosberg. And even when it was happening, right, I was like, you know, I'm sick of Nico Rosberg, you know, even while that season was going on, right? It was one of these situations where Nico situated himself as almost this kind of villain, but that's what it took to have himself mentally prepared to compete at the level he needed to against Lewis. He had to lose weight. He had to, you know, take the paint off of his helmet to pick up the couple of ounces that he thought he needed for that, right? He sacrificed his family life, everything, and he didn't want to do it again. He's like, and Lewis just keeps doing this, and he knows, because they've known each other since they were kids, is that engine's not going to idle, right? He's like, this guy's going to keep pushing this, and I can't go back to this well every year, and he just quits. And I dig that about him, right? I'm like, I get it, man. It's like, you know, he's like, I don't have another one of these in me, and I'm not going to be embarrassed by it, and I'm going to go away. And I think his initial, when he first returns to F1 as a commentator, I think he was still processing that. I think that's what you hear this kind of, you know, what you describe as him being kind of a jerk at that time, right? Because he's still trying to process this person still being able to go at this. You know, they came up together, they were close friends, et cetera. And Lewis just has an extra gear, and, you know, he found it for that 1 year, and he's like, I'm not doing that again. Whatever that took for him spiritually, right? It wasn't a physical, even a mental thing. It was something that you could tell really affected Nico Rosberg in ways that I think are really worth considering. Just the level of competition and level of competitive fervor that was acquired to pull that off.
And when we look at Ferrari this year with Lewis, and I hear him talk more and more about the team and pulling them in, and you write about it in the book, the team's going to gravitate to whoever's the number one driver. They just are. I mean, Sebastian Vettel came in, and all of a sudden he was the number one guy. And then this young guy named Max comes in. He's a pain in the ass, and he does it. Look at Lewis. Lewis came in with McLaren and was the guy out of the box. And look, I mean, you document without being, I don't want to say biased, but like when you talk about Fernando Alonso, I'm glad you addressed it the way you did, because were you as taken aback by some of the stuff he did as I am?
Sure, absolutely.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. He was, but, you know, and I almost feel sorry for Fernando, right? Because he came into that season with real expectations about what McLaren was supposed to do for him and what Lewis was supposed to do. Was supposed to be a number two to kind of, you know, basically make sure he got to the front and so he could win another world championship. And that was not what Lewis had in mind at all, right? And I think that shocked Fernando Alonso. And he had to deal with the young person coming in and basically disrupting and basically showing a world champion that he was better than him, right, as a rookie, which I think was a hard pill for Fernando to swallow.
And because the other thing I'm thinking about the dynamic of Charles Leclerc being with the team for so many years now. And you know, it feels to me like there is no bigger story than Lewis Hamilton driving for Ferrari. And I go all the way back to what I was talking, Michael, about that 1 year of commitment that Nico gave. Is there a world Lewis wins the title this year? Which is a real possibility. Do not dismiss. I hear people going, McLaren's got him covered. No, they don't. No, we don't know anything yet until the first three races at least. Is there a scenario where he could walk away and just do the behind the scenes stuff with Ferrari after 1 year?
Lewis walk away?
Yeah. He gets his eighth and he goes, I'm good. I'm still going to be a brand ambassador for Ferrari.
Yeah.
That's all. That's all. I needed to get that demon out of me. I got it out of me. I got the record. I'm good. I'm done.
I think I could see that, and in one way, I could see Lewis doing that, and I could also see him being like, let me put a ninth one here so nobody can ever get there, basically, right? And I could see him having that debate. And I think some of it depends upon how it goes down, right? Like how the season happens for him, right? Is it going to be this fight to like all the way to Abu Dhabi, or is it going to resolve itself, you know, somewhere around Mexico City or a U.S. Grand Prix in those seasons where, this kind of thing resolves itself and you kind of coast towards the end. I think it'll remain to be seen just what kind of mental effort he has to put in outside of the physical stuff. Because if he gets one, I could very easily see Lewis walking out on top, which I think would be unique and the way to kind of go out of the sport. We hope for that with athletes, and we never really get that opportunity,
The relationship with him and Toto, and you talk about obviously in the book, you can't talk about Lewis Hamilton without Mercedes, but the relationship, how would you describe it?
I think Lewis and Toto are as close personal friends as you can possibly be in that kind of situation. I think the personal decision was more difficult for him than the professional decision to leave Mercedes because of the close relationship. And I think that in many ways, and I think Toto has said this, right? He uses the language of a marriage when he's describing this now, right? He's like, because he said when he saw Lewis with Ferrari, he's like, you get divorced and, you kind of move on with your life. Then you see your ex with the new person. And it's like, you feel it again, right? So I think that's real for him, right? And I think that there was this anticipation from Toto that they would, ride off into the sunset together. But I think those years, 2022, 2023, where they did not listen to Lewis, and it was clear there was something going on there that was not appropriate from a professional's perspective. I think that's what soured the relationship. I think the personal relationship is still there. I think it was professionally something that was going on at Mercedes that didn't work out for him. And Toto can't go anywhere, right? He's an owner of the team, so it's not like you can fire him as like, the team principal and move on. So he's going to be there. So whatever was going on behind the scenes where Lewis is expressing his concerns with driver position, with these questions about the car being ready, should we scrap this design, and being ignored, I think Toto was not able to resolve that. And some of that, there's one argument to be made that could be because they had such a close personal relationship, that Lewis was not able to go in and kind of up in the table and be like, you need to get this straight out. I'm walking out of the door, period. Because I don't think Lewis ever threatened in that way, right? Because oftentimes you hear athletes will threaten, the administration, be like, I'll go somewhere else. Yeah. Right? And people get mad. This is LeBron James kind of one-on-one, right? He's like, I'm going to go somewhere else.
Miles Garrett just got a $40 million a year contract doing the exact thing. Doing the exact same thing. Saying, right. I'm done.
Yeah. Or else, right? So I think the personal relationship, and this is just Lewis's personality, right? If the or else wasn't there. And you can help me with this. I don't even know if Lewis has a manager, per se.
Don't know. I seriously don't know.
I don't know who it could be.
I don't know. It's not something you ever hear about. The only management team I really know about now is Alonso. Has got his own, that 18 that he's doing.
Yeah. I mean, once his dad left, as like the person out here negotiating stuff for Lewis, right? Like, Carlos Sainz has his kind of manager that who this person is, who represents, these people, right? Lewis is out here negotiating these things on it. Obviously, he's got a legal team that handles all this, right? But to me, it seems very personal with him. So I think that, that was part of the relationship with Toto. I think, I saw just last week after Toto made those comments that seemed like he was dismissing Lewis in certain ways. Then you see Lewis brought the MV Augusto over to Toto's apartment, right, to go talk to him about it. And they resolved it, right? I think it was a complex conversation.
I think, I honestly, your first impact, first time I heard it, I went, well, why is he saying that? And I'm thinking about it. That's somebody, an ex-coach poking a player going, you can do this. I think he was kind of poking Lewis going, yeah. You need to keep pushing. Don't, that, like you said, that's a different bond. Michael, I would be remiss. I mean, a huge component of this book is race. And anyone who tries to address the legacy of Lewis Hamilton as the GOAT, and he is, and I'm a guy who has Senna gear. I've got Ayrton Senna stuff hanging down in my basement. I watched the documentary, and I'll readily admit, Lewis Hamilton is the greatest F1 driver I've ever seen. But it's not just what he does on the track. It's what he has done and continues to do off the track. Has F1 changed at all?
Yeah, I think F1
has it? Okay.
As I think incrementally, and you see these things like with Bernie Ecclestone still hanging around.
Go away. That guy's got to go away. They got to do something about that. It's that's ridiculous.
I was frankly surprised to see Flavio Briatore come back too. Right? It's like,
how did that happen?
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that needs to be addressed. I know last year at the Brazilian, I think it was in Brazil where Nelson Piquet was running around again. He'd been banned for his kind of racist commentary and homophobic commentary, but he still hangs around. So Formula One hasn't done a good job of that, right? But I think with Lewis, and it's a very small sport, but very big in certain kinds of ways, right? I think what you've seen around journalists who have had opportunities because of Lewis, I think what you'll see around, what people will say with mechanics, what's going on with engineers, et cetera, across the board. And I think of him going to Ferrari and pushing Ferrari to do things that they probably would never have thought about for the long term, I think those are going to be real. There'll be real change there, and I think it's not going to happen as rapidly as anybody would like. But I think he clearly is laser beam focused on those things happening.
Well, and what he did, I remember watching, Black Lives Matter and Breonna Taylor, and something even as like wearing jewelry during a race, and how Lewis pushed back, and you saw the other drivers kind of follow his lead, and that's a powerful statement with 20 of is only 20 in the world, soon to be 22 when Cadillac gets in, but it's a small, like you said, it's a small group of people, very rich, powerful people that do this.
Yep.
And Lewis is the alpha, and it's not even close. It's not even close among them.
No, it's not even close. I saw the other day, it was, I think it was, must have been Lando. He was walking into a press conference or something, and he was trying to move around. So he said, "Hey, look, there's Lewis," and everybody turned. He's like, right? It's like everyone's going to run over to that direction, right? Hey, Lewis is over there. And so, yeah, I mean, and when you say someone's bigger than the sport, that can be taken reductively. I mean that in the most positive way I can mean it.
Sure.
Lewis is bigger than the sport, and I think what he's done is he's erased those lines. I think it needs to be filled in over time. And I think his long-term influence will be just that, right? We got to get back to having this type of elegance, right? Lewis is a very elegant competitor, I think, in ways that I really, that's a term I would like to use when thinking about his career to this point.
His driving style, like you said, it's so technical and smart. And that's one thing that, like, I love watching him drive. That's what makes him and Max such an interesting, they just don't mix. They don't mix. No. I mean, Max is a maniac. You watch him when he's iRacing or with anything, he's an absolute lunatic on the track. And Lewis is looking at him like, you're a maniac.
Yeah.
I kind of get a funny feeling that Lewis is going to outlast Max in F1, the way it's going.
Yeah, I think that's true. It'll be interesting to see if Max doesn't have a dominant car this year, how that works for him, right? Like just his kind of mental state, and whether he leaves and goes to Le Mans or whatever else he wants to do. It's just like, just done with it. Because I think he's used to that.
Well, and in the book, you address that with his dad, not only his dad, but when you look at some of these drivers, PK, and there's definitely a recurring theme about, their fathers have influenced these men as they come into the sport. And it's wild that Lewis, with his dad, is who he is. Not because Dad's a great guy, seems like a great guy, all this, but man, Lewis just keeps pushing, and so many of these drivers just use the word a-hole. They just turn out to be a-holes during the sport.
Yeah. And I think back to your question about what's going on at Ferrari, I think Charles Leclerc is like I think he's a very kind person. I think that relationship will work. And I think I felt terrible when Carlos Sainz lost his seat at Ferrari, right? I should see Carlos win a championship too. I thought he was going to learn how to string together the type of season he needs to string together. But I mean, it's a hard, difficult sport, right? And I think Lewis moves in ways, and I think this is back to where you were talking about Toto. I think if Lewis wins an 8th championship, I don't think there's going to be a dry eye on the path.
Oh my God. It's going to be a Dale Earnhardt at Daytona thing. Everyone's going to line up and just go nuts because he's done it.
I think that's true. And maybe even Helmut Marko will get us together at some point, right? Have something positive to say about him, right?
No, I don't think so.
Never worked, right? Yeah. I mean, I saw today he said something about how Lewis is not as fast as Leclerc. It's like, the telemetry says different, man. It's like, just sure, whatever. So I don't think Lewis listens to it, but I think, that kind of stuff is constantly out there.
Is it jealousy on some level? Is that too simple of a word for it?
No, I think that's it. I think it's jealousy. I think it's discomfort. I think there's real, when Bernie Ecclestone in many ways exemplifies this, right? And I mentioned in the book where Ecclestone was like, where it seemed like Lewis was going to win his 8th championship. Ecclestone's like, he should quit the sport because he doesn't deserve to win an 8th championship. So that's a cultural argument, right? It's not a sports argument, right? Just saying that this person should not alter the culture and disrupt what you think is who the greatest in order to clear the way. And he would never said that about Max Verstappen winning an 8th championship, never, under any circumstance, right? So I think there's real, jealousy, there's real dislike. And Lewis says it, right? He's like, I don't even entertain what these people say sometimes because it comes from such a deeply problematic place. There's only a couple of ways to understand it, and none of them are good.
Yeah, it's a wonderful read. It really is, and you maybe look at Lewis differently, and I'm looking forward to this year, obviously, and I highly recommend. Here's the best. I was talking to friends about the book, and I've had 2 of them ask for this. I'm like, well, buy your own copy so Michael can,
Right.
I'm not. This isn't a timeshare book. We can do this.
Right.
One last thing that I was thinking about when you talked about Senna in the book, and obviously Lewis's love for Ayrton. And I always gravitated to when he came from the Canadian Grand Prix, flew a red eye to England to be on Top Gear to drive that McLaren of Senna's.
Crazy.
And the look on his face, and when he was talking to Jeremy Clarkson, and he was practically in tears that he had got a chance to drive the car.
Right.
That's love of a sport on a level that very few people will ever be able to achieve, to be that good and that passionate for this long. I don't know anyone who's done it like Lewis. I really don't.
So that's why I use the term elegant, because that was an elegant thing, right? He's so invested in the romance of the sport. That's why kind of putting a period on the sentence with Ferrari is just so perfect, man. The Tifosi, you just imagine him winning in Monza, man. That Italy's going to, become an island. It's going to shake itself off from Southern Europe if that happens. It'll just be out of control.
Did you see the first time when they played the Italian anthem?
Yeah.
And the look on his face that he was up there wearing red. And you could see, I was thinking about, like, in the past, this had to be like, I got to listen to that goddamn anthem again as I've lost or I'm on the second step or whatever, listen to Ferrari again. But now you could see he's looking around like, oh my God, I'm driving for Ferrari. Even Lewis Hamilton was taking it in. And that was just the most real moment I've seen.
Yeah, I don't know if there's anything like that, right? I've been trying to think of like a team in a major sport where the team is bigger than the sport in some ways, right? And, people could say this about maybe in American sports, the Dallas Cowboys, maybe like somebody who gets to play. But it doesn't work for me in that way, right? I think Ferrari, and I think Sebastian Vettel said this, like, everybody's a Ferrari fan, period, right? Even if you're not, you are, right? Literally, every single person is. And so there's romance there, man. It's the Tifosi. And it's all of it. So we'll see.
Well, it's the only sport that I know that we all watch at the same time live worldwide. It's not like, you can talk about Champions League and Premier League and all the different soccer leagues and football going on around the world, but those are different matches, different times. Every world in the country has somebody up watching F1 at the exact same time.
Absolutely.
And it's unlike any sport in the world. That's what makes Lewis so compelling to me. Like you said, not only the GOAT in racing, but I think the most powerful athlete, one of the most powerful figures of the past 30 years.
I think so. Absolutely. There's no doubt about that in my mind.
Yeah. Now, I just hope, last thing I'll say about this, being here in Detroit, I always get nervous about someone saying they're overtraining, because Tommy Hearns famously burned himself out. That's why he lost to Leonard. Emmanuel Stewart screamed for years, quit running, and he wouldn't stop. And then his legs went away, and you saw it, and he buckled. He was beating Leonard.
No doubt.
He was so determined to win that fight. It bothered him so much that at Kronk Gym, he would see Sugar Ray, Sugar Ray, Sugar Ray.
Yeah.
Does Lewis find fuel with Charles? Does he look at Charles and go, I want that. I want to be the alpha here at Ferrari?
Yeah, I think he does. I think there's no doubt about that. Lewis is there, and I think Charles knows that. And I think, it'll be interesting to see how they manage it. I think his overtraining question, I think it's important. He's got his whole team back around him. His physio, Angela's back. So I think they know what needs to be done to get him where he needs to be. So I'm excited about that. But yeah, that's always something that you worry about. Track and field was my first sport. And I remember a few years ago when it was Justin Gatlin had overtrained for Usain Bolt, right? And when they got he just burned himself out. And the one race he needed he'd had it 2 weeks ago, right? And he wasn't, and it was just over. He'd been spent all the time convincing himself he could beat him. Then when it came time to do it, he had used all the energy convincing himself. So it wasn't there. So I think Lewis knows more about this sport. And, this is a race of every athlete, to get to that point where you know as much that you can still apply it physically, right? I think Lewis I think he's in that space where he knows what he knows now and still can physically apply it. And I think we saw that in testing where he seems to adjust it quite quickly to the car. So I'm optimistic about it.
Just qualify better. If he qualifies better, he's fine.
Sure.
That's all he's got to do. If he can qualify better, last year he would have been so much, and he readily admitted that was the thing. But Michael, I could talk to you all day about this. Lewis Hamilton, Sir Lewis, the name of the book. Again, I cannot, if someone in your life is a Formula One fan, you can kindle it, but get this. We have pictures and everything. So you did a wonderful job with this.
Thanks so much, Jim. I'll check in with you during the season. So we'll see how it's going.
Let's do that.
Yeah,
I forgot to ask you, what did you learn from this book? Every time I talk to someone who writes about a figure, you learn something about yourself. What did you learn during the process?
I learned that as I mentioned in the dedication, right, that it's not just about wins and losses, right? Because you can get bogged down with that. And I want to keep that in mind as we head for this next season. Like, we all want Lewis to win this, but his effect has been so much broader than that. And I go back to thinking about when I was a kid and watched Ali lose to Larry Holmes, and I cried for 2 days after that. It was inconsolable, right? And I had to learn, I want to be better than 12-year-old me at this point, right? To be able to learn to watch this person's career and just be glad that we were able to see this, right? Because I've missed a lot, I didn't see Jesse Owens, right? I didn't see, Will Chamberlain when he scores 100 points. I didn't see those kinds of things. But we're getting to sit here and watch this happen. So I really want to enjoy it from that perspective.
It was like somebody was trying to explain what Wayne Gretzky was like to a younger person at work, and they're going, but Ovechkin's going to break his goal record. I'm like, you don't seem to understand. He also has the assist record. That's like saying Will Chamberlain averaged 50 a game and 40 assists.
Right.
And he goes, that would never happen. I'm like, well, it happened in hockey, and that was the guy. That's where Lewis is now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he's a good example of that conversation. Carl Lewis in 84 at the games, right? It's like
that wasn't real. That wasn't real. Insane. Yeah.
So no, that's what I learned from this.
All right. Well, we will definitely talk during the season. We'll kind of get there in the middle of the season as well. Congratulations on the book. Stay in touch. You ever in the Motor City? Come on in. We'll talk.
We'll do that. Thanks a lot, Jim.
All right. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, bud.
Bye.